Welcome to Ngā Kōrero Mō Te Wā Ki Te Heke Mai o Te Mataranga, Conversations on the Future of Education, Episode 12, Why Child-Centred Learning Isn't the Soft Option. I'm Derek Wenmoth, your host, and with me today is Sarah Aiono. Well, tēnā koe, Sarah. It's so good to have you on this podcast. Been looking forward to this particular session after I heard you speak at a recent conference. And I know you've got a lot of thoughts on education and where we're headed at the moment, but maybe for the sake of those who are tuning into the podcast, you could just tell us a little bit about your story as an educator and where you are.
Yeah, well, kia ora, Derek, and thank you for the invitation. I'm a classroom teacher by trade. I trained as a primary school teacher through Massey University and quickly sort of jumped into the classroom, initially as an intermediate school teacher up in Auckland. And after I had kind of honed my craft as a young teacher, I remember this moment of kind of going, is this it now? Like, come December, do I rinse and repeat, hit January, start all over again? You know, and I'm not so good at the monotonous and the mundane. So I started looking for different challenges, and I found myself in a job that was created out of some learning enhancement funding at the time in South Auckland, working with children who were transient kids in a school there, and particularly children who were coming in from other schools that were presenting with really challenging behaviours, either through diagnosed conditions or what we would now call trauma impacted children. Oh, yeah. And so my work really quickly kind of pivoted from the average classroom teacher into learning about psychology and neurodiversity and trauma and all that kind of stuff. And I loved it. It was the best job I've ever had, was working with these kids. I had at the most 15 in my classroom, all of them boys except for one, and she held her own with these boys. And they were just my loves, you know. They made me cry, they made me laugh. I was bruised on many days, but they just, that was the whole reason I was working. But it's not a job that you can sustain because it's what I call a heart job. And it had its impact on me, on my wider family at the time. And so we made the decision to step out of that role. And I moved into the RTLB service, and I worked as an RTLB both in South Auckland, and then we relocated back to Hawke's Bay as our family grew. We were a young family at the time. And between RTLB work and working as a special education advisor with the ministry for a while and their behaviour team, kind of jumped around this idea of behaviour, engagement, square box, round peg kind of stuff with education. Dabbled with the idea of doing ed psych, wasn't sure about that. And I guess really I got to a point where it was national standards time. I was RTLBing, and I was getting more and more of these referrals coming around disengaged kids, off-task kids who weren't meeting the level, the standard, you know. And I just kept thinking there's got to be a better way to do this than trying to squeeze kids to fit a box. And at the same time, the teacher workforce was so burnt out under standards, and it was just a horrible, yucky time in education in New Zealand. And so at the same time that was going on, I was part of the National Practice Group delivering Incredible Years for Teacher program in New Zealand. And that, you know, has its ups and downs with that program, but there was particularly within that this focus on building social and emotional competencies in children, and the methods for doing that, which I really connected with, along with my previous work working with behaviour kids. And so I wanted to investigate that more around how do we really grow social and emotional competency. That, to me, should be the priority. And while that was going on, my mum actually was at the sort of, I'd call them her twilight years of teaching, where she was questioning this whole national standards thing and saying this is ridiculous and why can't we teach the way we want to teach. And she had actually started a forest school and was having the most amazing experience as a teacher, teaching in the forest all day, every day with 5-year-olds and 6-year-olds, learning through play, They were still doing their reading and their writing and their maths, but they were playing. And we could just see these children developing the most amazing key competencies, like just so in tune and getting the basics. And here I was in classrooms where children were off the wall because they were, doing 3 hours of literacy a day. And so it was just this question that kept coming up. So that led me to my doctoral research, asking all these questions and looking at the role of play and child-led learning and child-centered learning, and that tricky balance between teaching reading, writing, maths and children leading their learning. And so part of all of that, we created along with education, because we kind of started coming together with these ideas, Mum and I, around what learning should look like and children and how they learn. And that was 10 years ago now. And we've been kept pretty busy since, really, with all that working in schools and working globally around supporting teachers to understand the complexity of child-led learning.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story, Sarah, and a lot of experience you have to bring to the work that you're doing now. And I wonder if I can pick up on that childhoodness, because that's something that resonates strongly with me, the work that I've done in Learner Agency and so forth. And I guess I'm from that generation where that was at the heart of that we worked a lot. But at the moment, that seems to be under a huge amount of pressure, not just in New Zealand, but internationally. The voices, uh, opposing the idea of student-centeredness and giving students ownership, often with claims of evidence that it doesn't work and so forth. I'm interested, perspective as someone who's deeply studied. How do you counter that thinking?
I think that, like with a lot of things at the moment, not just in education, but in a lot of areas of public service, I think concepts are being simplified and not given the level of understanding that they deserve, and then are quickly dismissed in favour of the preferred narrative, whatever that might be. And I think what we see in education is this polarising of pedagogies rather than understanding the integrated nature of them. So we get presented with either you do child-centered or you do direct instruction. And child-centeredness is this waffly, let the child figure it out, kind of work it out for themselves thing. And I often say in workshops with teachers, when we're sort of doing an introductory course around this, is this concept that if children are playing, the teacher goes and checks their Facebook and has a coffee and puts their feet up, because we've got this misinterpretation that you mustn't interfere, you mustn't involve yourself, let them discover it for themselves. And there is an aspect of play and play work that has that concept within it, but even that's misrepresented in a very simplified way. We also have this idea of, we've can't leave anything to chance. We're going to get kids to, sit and learn and fill them up, and that's the way that they're going to be taught. And I know that people who are advocates of direct instruction also say that's not quite representing what it means either. What I love to talk about as a teacher or an educator is that, well, I talk about, I'm a petrol head as a side hobby, and I talk about having a toolbox. And as a teacher, every day you walk into the classroom and you have this toolbox. And depending on the number of years you've been teaching and the kinds of kids you've worked with and families and things, you'll have all sorts of tools in that toolbox. And it's really about, over time, knowing your craft, knowing which tool you're going to pull out for the job that's in front of you. So if you've got a child that comes to you and is struggling to decode words, then you're not going to say, I'm going to leave you to it, you'll work it out. We are going to pull that tool out that says, I'm going to help you learn the decoding process. And here are the tools that I know that works to teach a child how to decode text. And at the same time, we also have a tool in there that says, but I'm also going to ensure that a child connects with literature in a joyous and engaging and wondrous way that puts that skill in the context that it's needed and not in isolation. And so, again, with child-centered learning, one of the things that we talk about is not only the huge benefit in social and emotional development when you allow children to lead their learning, but also in some really high order executive function skills and high order cognitive skills that we know cannot be directly taught. They have to come up in a very natural way that are now allows a child to want to pursue them. And then we use tools of skill development to support that exploration. And that's the complexity that's missing in that really simplified either or approach to teaching. I share with leaders that if your teachers are coming to you saying they want to pursue this pedagogical approach, they are choosing the most complex way of teaching. They're not choosing the easy option. And they need a level of support to be able to do it really well.
I think that's one of the things that strikes me, Sarah, in the work that I've been doing too, is about the toolbox approach, and that's a method I've used throughout my work, even as a teacher educator. It actually put quite a different and greater degree of emphasis, I think, on the role and responsibility of educators, of teachers, right? And often I see some of those simple approaches being adopted because it's easier to do and it's simpler. I'm interested as we think about the future of education, where we're headed. What is on what we need to be doing to equip our educators and not on not just the just in case equipping we do in the pre-service, but through their role as educators. What should we be focusing on and emphasizing?
Yeah, one of the things that really shapes a lot of the conversations and work that I do with teachers is actually the craft of observation, and this idea that good assessment takes time, and that observation is data collection. And we go to the easy data collection tools. Testing, questioning is an easy data collection tool. We grill a child and get them to give us the answer to check their understanding. Observation takes time to do. It requires space to be able to be in a moment where you can hopefully gather the right information and observe in a way that is true to the intention of what the children are doing, and you're not assuming things. And so that's a skill that many teachers aren't supported to do. I've often spent time where I've said to a teacher, come with me, and we've literally tried to melt into the wall and step right back and I've had to say, now tell me what you can see here.
Right. Yeah.
And they've really struggled. And I said, well, I can see. And I've started to point out all the curriculum I can see in front of me. And they say, oh, and it's like I've given them my glasses and they can see differently. So I think that's a skill that takes time as part of your practitioner growth, but can be supported with people that can do it alongside teachers. Yeah. What sits a lot at the heart of the work I do that came out of my doctoral research was very, very clear evidence around appropriate and impactful professional development. So while I focused in on play, as my supervisor and my research kept saying to me, your research isn't actually about play, it's about professional development and teacher change. I was holding on to the play, but it was really around what supports do teachers need to be able to implement play with fidelity, so that we're not getting this simplified laissez-faire approach, or we're not getting this overly controlled approach. How do we get the benefits that all the research says child-centered learning gives us through our practice? What decisions do we make as intentional teachers, and how do we support teachers to do that? And one of the things that we noticed very clearly was that there is this knowledge to practice gap, or belief to practice gap. So you can talk to teachers a lot about child-centered learning, appropriate, developmentally appropriate practices, and teachers will talk mostly quite passionately and knowledgeably about it, but then translate that into practice in a classroom where you've got 25 kids. A good percentage of them now, reality is they're neurodiverse, so they're different. You've got, a teacher aide for 30 minutes a day. You've got all of that cocktail of a classroom. And a teacher says, how do I do it? I know it's important, but how do I do it? And so this idea around creating supports for teachers to understand practice that's observable and measurable. So I work with teachers where we say, okay, so if we want to raise the quality of the feedback you're giving children so that it allows children to stay in control of their learning, because often we ask kids questions that interrupt learning or influence the decisions that they're making and put them in a different direction from what they might have been going in. How do we give feedback, model curiosity or model creative thinking without telling them what to do, so that we see their response? And so that might be literally, for example, using a term we call positive descriptive feedback, giving positive descriptive feedback. And so I'll literally quantify it and say to a teacher, right, between now and the next time I come back, every day you're going to aim for 3 positive descriptive feedback statements every day. And when you've hit that 3, you're going to add in this exploration promoting statement. And so we literally quantify it because we're wanting to shift that practice over time. And that's something that internationally the literature is growing around how we support change for teachers. We're quite a way behind here in New Zealand with that research around how we support teachers to do that. But it's just helping our teachers. They just need the nuts and bolts, and they need someone to say, there it is, this is how it's done, but not in a way that's a textbook or a scripted lesson, or we don't want to go down that, because that equally is that other way of killing the responsivity and the creativity which is part of the craft of being a teacher as well.
I think what I'm hugely encouraged listening to what you're saying there, Sarah, is the relational side of teacher development is at the heart of this. As you say, not textbook, but it's something that's growing a journeyman kind of approach. The big issue, of course, is time, because we're still in a system that sees a teacher in front of a classroom and their time to work with kids. We don't seem to track how we create a culture with our schools and within our system that allows for that to happen. Do you have some thoughts on how that might work?
Yeah, I mean, I think probably 20 years ago, I would have been that person that's gone, we've got to burn the system down and start again and change it, and and kind of come at it at a systems level. And I think as I've probably got a bit more wiser, a little wiser, I've realized that actually the best change comes from the ground up. And so we come in at that ground, and I'll go into schools where a teacher will be saying to me, I really like this idea of child-centered learning and I want to do more of it, but I've got an hour a day I've got to cover for this, and I've got this I've got to do. And so I say to them, well, let's look at where you could do it for a little bit. So where in your day, let's look at your timetable, let's create a bit of space.
Right.
Because what we want to do is get them to experience it. And what I have absolute faith in and have seen over and over is that the more a teacher experiences the outcomes of this, the more they want it. And I've had teachers who have said they'll never go back now. And, they've seen what this can do and they just won't go back. And they then become the change and they shift it in the school. There's been times where, one of the biggest things that we talk about is the art of timing your explicit instruction groups. So, your reading groups, for example, and allowing children time to explore and lead their learning. And where do we get that time to do both? And often, if we've got some lovely child-centered play going and the teacher can see it's humming, I'll often be able to say to a teacher, you could take a group now and this will keep going. Do you want to try it? Just pull a group out and do a bit of a reading lesson here, and look, they carry on, and they kind of go, wow, this is great. And I've actually had some teachers now in Australia say to me, it's amazing, like the amount of work they do. They just do so much. And in the past, I've been trying to do my reading group and I've been trying to keep these kids on task as they're doing their follow-up worksheets and, this management stuff they've tried to put out, when actually when children are leading their learning, they go for it and you don't need to manage them the same way.
Yeah.
So it's just giving them the experience and then letting it grow much more organically.
It's such a delicious kind of mix that happens in there. And as you see, so often we're intent on bringing rigor in ways that aren't helpful, because they actually interrupt the flow of a student's learning, the flow of their play, as you've described it, isn't it?
Yeah. Well, and I think we confuse rigor for control and rigor for management. Child-centered learning is deeply rigorous and rich. It's just we have to get out of the way to let that happen sometimes. And we often put control in place for the fear that we're going to lose control and we're going to not have that richness. And it's actually the opposite.
Yeah. I'm interested to test your view in an area that's quite topical at the moment. It's the whole issue of AI, because when it comes to managing and looking after a class, as you say, that may have 25 kids, neurodiverse, lots of different needs, there's a a wave of thought among some that, oh, well, AI will be the solution for that because we can have a personal tutor for those kids and that sort of thing. And I think there seem to be two levels of conversation taking place, because one's at a very technical level, looking at the way things of AI, because AI bots and things could do that sort of thing on an individual basis. But I think what it does is it creates a challenge then to what is education about? What is it that we're trying to achieve in a school? Where might AI more appropriately be positioned, if
Yeah.
indeed it works? I know you've had a bit of thinking about that. I'm interested in what where you see this all heading.
Well, just from the outset, I think that we are woefully slow in New Zealand at the moment to recognise that AI is here, and our children are using it. So we can stick our head in the sand and say, "Oh gosh, that's a problem for the future." It's here. It's not the future. It's here. And again, AI is evolving at such a rapid rate that certainly even a year ago to now, its capabilities are enormous. So we can't pretend it's not in the room. My thoughts are twofold. I think obviously there's always a piece that's going to be there around safety and around ensuring that what our children are interacting with is in their best interests and it keeps them safe. And we know that there's aspects of AI that, there's the doom and gloom around, it can take you down these certain pathways and things like that. So to acknowledge that there is that piece that needs to sit there, are safety nets around that. But the potential that it has, I think, is huge when it comes to meeting the diverse needs of our kids. If we are taking the idea that the role of the educator in a pedagogical approach is child-centered, a child-centered pedagogical approach, the role of the educator is to facilitate experiences and enable conditions for learning, right? Yeah. As opposed to the traditional model of the teacher being the deliverer of content and the keeper of knowledge, then to me, AI can come alongside the teacher to be able to supplement the teacher's ability to create the conditions for learning, right? It means that as teachers, we don't have to know everything. We don't have to have all the answers. But I think what's really important is that we as educators have to have the skills to be able to critically analyze, model critical thinking, model creativity and curiosity, model the kind of thinking we want children to be engaging with so that they can use AI as the tool to support that rather than using it as a form of Google or tutoring that teaches us the knowledge, right? Because I think that with AI, you can interact with it and ask it questions and accept at face value the content it gives you. And we know that that's dangerous because it's not always correct. And so the bit that's missing, I think, is how do we help our children become critical, interacting people with AI and have the ability to think in deep, reflective ways so that they get the benefits of AI and AI can challenge their thinking and vice versa. And that to me, I think would be sort of the icing on the cake is using that within a diverse classroom.
I love it. I love that. Thanks, Sarah. I probe you then for another perspective as we think about the future, because I think AI represents one of those curly or gnarly questions that we have about how does this fit? And then we have to ask, well, what are we trying to make it fit into, which takes us into the question we outlined. One of the things I'm interested to hear your thoughts on then is the other issue that I see, I guess, confronting us in our mental model of schools and schooling, and that is where parents and whānau and community fit. Because one of the things that, from my experience with play-based stuff, for example, is it creates enormous opportunities for those linkages to become much more integrated and meaningful and so forth. And it seems to me that, and particularly as I look at what's happening with the OECD's 2030 project, the central place of parents and whānau and community is important. How do you see that playing out in your view of where we're headed?
Oh, look, I've always, my dream is that a school becomes the hub of a community, that it's not, you send your children off and they go through the gate for 13 years and then you get them back and they go out into society the way they go. To me, that the school should be representative of community learning, and that learning isn't just for the kids that walk through the door and it's, delivered by the people who are hired to do it. I think that there's such an opportunity to recognise the enormous expertise that sits in a community,
yep.
and how that can be leveraged to support effectively the futures of our children. I love the work the OECD is doing around flourishing and human flourishing,
Yeah.
and they talk particularly about that in their 2025 report, about creating this community connection and seeing these expertise coming in and out of the school, and that the school is the sort of conduit for different expertise. And I mean, one of the things we talk about within a play setting is this idea of creating play invitations and inviting children to interact with things by putting some new things in front of them, or inviting them to explore in certain ways. And one of the resources that we talk about that is useful as a play invitation, apart from things like loose parts and literature and things like that, is experts. And we are in a time now where it doesn't even have to be an expert in your local community. If you've got children who are fascinated with space and space exploration, which I think we saw recently at a school in Christchurch, I think, where they talked to the International Space Station, right? I mean, that's just fantastic in terms of kids actually having a connection to the experts who can talk about something they're passionate about and model that passionate connection to learning in such a way that it just broadens the experience for our children of learning than what they would have traditionally got in a classroom, in a school, you know, in their community. And I also think the flip side to it is we've got a lot of parents who didn't have a great time at school, had traditional schooling that didn't affirm their talents and their interests, and they left school thinking that they were dumb. You know, we've got to address that, because that is the you know, school caused that. But at the same time, can we now show, you know, I'm thinking of some very clever business owners, tradies out there who probably were your, you know, tougher kids at school, that sort of left at 16 and said, sod this, I'm out. And they're running, you know, multi-million-dollar businesses, and they've got, you know, all sorts of projects going on. And they can connect with those kids in school who see themselves as that and not a traditional pathway. So how do we bridge that and connect that in different ways? It can be done in public school. It doesn't have to just be a niche specialty or charter school approach. It should be in every community school that we have.
I think the other thing, Sarah, that intrigues me about community involvement, and it links to something you said a bit earlier, because you've illustrated very well that bringing expertise in, which, as you say, the OECD talks about. But the OECD also hint at the idea that, you know, education used to be a certain future. You know, you had a pathway to a career, you had a pathway to an outcome. Now we've got a less certain future. We've got great stuff that's not there in the same level of certainty as it was. And that's not just for our students, but it's also for our parents and members as well. And so seeing that whole community as a learning organization almost becomes really important, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, and I think that for too long, learning has been relegated to school. You know, school is the place that's that special place of learning. You go there, you do what the teacher says, you get these qualifications, and you've done your learning, and then you go out to work. And we know that probably did work 50, 100 years ago when there was that career pathway and that job security. You know, when we think of a bigger picture, again, of this idea of flourishing, our communities are not flourishing because they haven't got the ability to pivot, or are not resilient because there needs to be a retraining or a relearning go on because that career pathway has changed. And so, again, bringing the school back to this place of the community of learning rather than school is for kids and you go and you do your learning and you leave, I think is just going to aid to the strength and the health of a community in so many more ways than just the special building for kids to go to from 9 till 3.
Yeah. And as you and I were talking before the podcast, you know, that centrality of trust is a key thing in all of that, right? It builds trust, which builds confidence for facing all precursors to flourishing, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you know, yes, we've got that aspect in there of recognizing that you've got this establishment that the special learning goes on. But if we get our community in there and can see how teachers work, how school leaders work, how a school works, and they understand the complexities of school much more, then we're going to bridge that divide. I think that's happening at the moment between parents and schools, where there's a misunderstanding of the role. And we know that teachers are often at the butt of politicians' jibes around the failures of the education system. It must all be the teacher's fault. And so if we have our parents who are just comfortable coming in and out of the school all the time, who feel and have a vested interest or contribution in the school, then hopefully it means that they can see and understand much more about what's going on for educators as well.
Sarah, that's a great place to end our podcast for today. I'm just keeping an eye on our time. I'll try and keep them. But really, really good. A thought from you, top of mind, if you just had one piece of advice for an educator or a parent or whoever might be listening to this about what lies in the future of education, what might that be as a word of wisdom for them?
Look, I feel right at the moment we're on the cusp of something really interesting in education and the evolution of education. It's a messy, mucky time where there's lots of push and pull going on, but you've got to have that. It's like that gooey chrysalis time, right, which I think we're in. And I really do feel that there's this momentum growing to this, whatever this butterfly is going to become, because there is recognition that what we've done isn't working. It's perpetuating more problems than what we can cope with. And despite what's happening in New Zealand, we know overseas that there are many places now going, we can't go back. We can't keep doing those things. We've got to look forward. New Zealand's going to take a bit of time to catch up to that. But I know working in that international space we're definitely in that sort of transformative chrysalis time. So I'm really hopeful that the future will be a bright one. We've just got to get through the muck first.
Sarah, so much. Great to have a hopeful end to a conversation like this. And all the best in the work you do. I'm so admiring of all that you do and contribute to our education system at the moment.
Thank you so much.
Aiono.
Ka kite.